Hello and welcome to the latest edition of GreenFleet Talks. My name's Kate Armitage, your host for the discussion, and I am delighted to be joined by Edmund King, President of the AA. Hi, Edmund.
Hi there, Kate.
Great to speak to you. I think it's been a while since we've spoken, so I'm very pleased to see you.
Indeed, and lots has been happening, particularly in the electric vehicle space since we last spoke.
Oh, indeed. Well, I mean, I do think it's fair to say there is never a dull moment in the world of electric vehicles, and this week has definitely been no exception. So we have, we now finally get the full detail of the autumn budget. So I would like to probe you on your thoughts on that. And I think the most obvious talking point is the announcement that we will be looking at a pay-per-mile scheme for EV drivers with a proposed launch date of 2028. What's your reaction to this news?
Well, I think the reaction is that at last we've got some detail about this scheme, because the really dangerous thing was all the speculation about EV pay as you drive, road pricing. Would it be a poll tax on wheels? Would there be implications for people's privacy, for technology? And all of those arguments came out because basically the government had leaked bits of their thinking, but not the entire picture. So actually, the scheme that has emerged from the Treasury, and they're calling it EVED, so that's Electronic Vehicle Excise Duty, is actually quite clever. Because what they've done, they've come up with quite a simple scheme that does away with all those issues about cameras or infrastructure or concerns about privacy. So it really is quite a simple scheme, and it literally is based on your mileage, and one time a year you declare what your mileage is likely to be in your EV. You declare it to the DVLA, and then you are charged based on that estimate. So if it's 8,000 miles a year for an EV car, you'll be charged 3p a mile. So that comes to about £240 or £20 a month. And rather like the tax disc, you can pay it in one go, or you can pay it in installments. And then at the end of the year, you go back to have your MOT. If your car's over 3 years of age, they would then check that mileage. And if it's below the estimate, those miles will be carried over. If it's under, you might have to pay a bit more. So that really is quite a clever scheme. There's still a bit of a question for those kind of fleet cars or newer cars under 3 years of age, because obviously they don't have an MOT till year 3. And there is some debate, and the consultation asked questions about how that mileage would be checked. Would people have to go into an MOT centre? Or indeed, we're thinking at the AA, could there be a role for the AA? We've got 3,000 patrols out there. We've got mobile mechanics. Could they do mileage checks to make it easier for consumers? And then, of course, in the future, you could look at technology. All cars today, modern cars, have got some form of onboard diagnostics that actually register the mileage. So the mileage could actually be checked remotely. Now, obviously, some will say, well, that might entail privacy or location sensors, etc. But I still think generally the Treasury's come up with a good scheme. Downsides that we're getting asked about: what if I take my car to France? Will I have to pay? And it appears you will. So that perhaps is a little bit harsh, because you'd still be paying 3p a mile to drive to Bordeaux or Burgundy, and you'd be paying the French tolls if you're using the autoroutes to go there, and you won't be damaging UK roads, but you'd still be paying 3p a mile. However, I think if you had to declare your mileage at Dover or Folkestone before you set off, I think that would add a level of complexity. So maybe that's something that drivers will just have to abide by that.
Yeah, it hadn't even occurred to me actually, and of course, a lot of people don't drive on the continent, so it's a moot point. But there obviously are, and particularly business users who potentially are high drivers, or if you've got a holiday home or whatever. So, yeah, potentially quite a big consideration. Well, I mean, we've got 3 years, right, to work this through, or 2 and a bit years to.
I mean, there is a question on that, Kate, because it was announced this year, and yet it won't be implemented till at least April 2028, which, over 3 years' time. And really, the slight problem with that, even though I've said it's quite a good scheme, it's a simple scheme, the problem is this kind of mixed messaging that's going out from government. So on the one hand, they're trying to encourage, rightly so, the uptake of zero emission vehicles. And obviously there's, quite strict guidance via the ZEV mandate for 2030, 2035. So they're encouraging that. Mm. But at the same time, this message will put off some drivers. Some of those drivers, and all our surveys of the AA do show a degree of hesitancy around cost, around range, around charging. So anything that, if you like, paints a negative picture may put some people off. So I think ideally they could have actually waited a year before announcing this, and they could have still had a full consultation. I just think it's come slightly early. But anyway, it's out there now, and I think we have to look at the positives. And some of the positives are, if you look at fuel duty, you actually pay double the 3p a mile. Yeah. So fuel duty is about 6p a mile. If you include VAT, it's about 7p a mile. So even with this charge, EV drivers should be better off. I think the one area, Kate, that hasn't been looked at that much is plug-in hybrids. And with plug-in hybrids, there will be a charge of 1.5p a mile. Now, okay, that sounds a good discount from 3p, but if you think of a plug-in hybrid that, say, does 50 miles on an electric, but you're going on a 150-mile journey, well, you will be charged that 3p a mile for that 150-mile journey, even though you only get the benefit of electric for that 50 miles, and you're paying fuel duty for those other 100 miles, and you're paying the EV duty. So I actually think for hybrids, it might put some people off hybrids. And I did try and question the Treasury whether this was an intention of the scheme, and they tried to reassure me that it wasn't.
No.
Who knows?
Yeah. And it's been a funny time for plug-in hybrids in general, in terms of that mixed messaging and the kind of softening of the ZEV mandate as well, which has kind of touched on that plug-in hybrid potential. So I agree with you. I also have to say, the government can't win, because for things like benefit in kind, we've been saying you've got to give us more notice to help us understand when these costs are going to change. So they've given us more notice. But like you say, the downside is it will be used to fuel misinformation and another negative point potentially against electric vehicles.
But you are right to mention, benefit in kind and, giving some reinsurance there. I think that is really crucial. The other thing that was slightly hidden away as well, it's about incentives for charge post operators not paying business rates or the higher level of business rates for, I think they said, for 10 years. So again, there's a bit of reassurance there. So yeah, it's certainly not all bad news. We've had a lot worse budgets in the past.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And there was an olive branch as well from the Chancellor, because she announced extending the car grant out with a £1.3 billion package So that's great news. Plus additional money, I think, for charging infrastructure and capability funding for local authorities to really help them get behind that growth of the public network. So I think some positives. Do you think that went far enough in terms of the incentives? Yeah. What more would you like to see?
I've got to say, on the new car grant, the electric vehicle car grant, I actually think that was quite generous, because even before the budget, some 35,000 drivers had taken advantage of that. And if you look at the 1.3 billion, most of the grants are for £1,500. Not that many cars have qualified for the full £3,750. But if you take a mixture of those grants, that amount of money can pay between 500,000 and 800,000 new EVs coming onto the market.
Yeah.
So that really is an incentive, particularly at a time where we are getting a lot of smaller EVs under £37,000 that are actually really good cars. You look at things like the Renault 5 and stuff, Car of the Year and all of that qualifies for that grant. So I do think there will be many consumers that were kind of on the cusp, and at the AA we've developed this EV readiness index, and we did find for some drivers, just that extra cost of the new EV compared to the petrol equivalent did slightly put them off. This grant can equalize those costs in some cases. So I think that is very positive. It's a step in the right direction. I know others within the industry were also looking for some help on used EVs, which would have been welcome. And that's something that the Treasury hasn't yet addressed. So I'm sure there will still be some calls there, because if you can encourage that used EV market, get the values up a bit more, it will help fleets with residual values. It will help the industry being able to invest more in those cars for fleets. So there's still some way to go, but I think generally the settlement that we've seen, if we look at it in the round, I think it's certainly a positive step in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I think that overall, the landscape for passenger vehicles and the electrification of passenger vehicles is very positive. When we start talking about commercial vehicles, and that could be vans or the larger vehicles, it's a little bit more challenging, and the market's moving a bit slower. And again, we're not getting much from the government on that. Although the end date, in terms of 2040 for the ban of petrol, diesel, and of course net zero by 2050 doesn't change. So is there a rallying call for government when we talk about commercial vehicles?
Yeah, I think on one level, though, there is some good news from what we've just been talking about, because the pay-as-you-go, or the electronic vehicle excise duty, doesn't apply to vans, to trucks, to buses, or indeed to motorcycles. So I think that is very positive. And the reason for that, the government actually recognises that electric vans are not quite at the same stage as electric cars in terms of their development. So I think that is good, because we know from some other changes in regulation. So if we look at London, the London congestion charge, and despite all our efforts campaigning to the mayor not to remove the full exemption for vans and cars from the congestion charge, the mayor is still going ahead and reducing those incentives in January. And I think that's a real shame, because we've seen an increase in electric vans, particularly in central London, which, is great for the economy, but it's great for the environment as well. Air quality in London is so much better in central London than it was 10 years ago. I remember 10 or 15 years ago, you'd spend a day in London walking around, you'd blow your nose, there'd be soot from diesel particulates. So I think it's unfortunate there that the mayor, and I know that's a local issue, but it sends out the wrong message, because we were getting an acceleration of electric vans in London. So I think government, local government, national government needs to be more joined up in these initiatives, because, these signals do affect the market. So there's that. On the more positive side, I think we heard in August that the plug-in van grants and the truck grants were being extended. So I think that is a positive thing. I still think there's some way to go with infrastructure, ensuring that charge posts are accessible for vans and larger vehicles. And I know some charge post operators are doing a lot in that area, but I think that needs to be speeded up as well. Within the AA, we found that where our kind of patrols with electric vehicles, where they can charge at home, it is much more cost effective again for us as a company. And we reimburse those rates, but there really is such a difference between the patrol that can charge their van at home overnight compared to someone who has to charge the van on the move, and sometimes on ultra rapid chargers, where you can pay 80, 90 p a kilowatt. So again, we need to look at charging in the round, making it more accessible, making it easier for those people without off-street parking to either have things like cross pavement gullies, to speed up the legislation there to make it easier. So I think, generally government's on the right tracks. Generally, the van industry is putting vehicles on the market that are more accessible, that are more affordable. On the heavy van truck side, you do still pay a premium, to go electric. I mean, at the AA, we've got one very large truck that can transport various vehicles. The drivers actually love using it. They don't have problem with the charging and all of that. It's just for our fleet director, it costs about 3 times the amount of a general truck. So, we do need prices to come down, which generally you do see as battery technology evolves and all of that. But I still think there's some way to go in the commercial vehicle market.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And it's a little bit dangerous to kind of look at the passenger car market and say, well, this is what happened there, so this is what's going to happen here, because they are different. And these are bigger vehicles, they need more power. We know that there's a challenge with those grid connections already. And as you quite rightly said, This is about balancing the books. This is a mathematical decision about, I need these vehicles ideally to have price parity. You might be prepared to pay a small premium, but when the upfront cost is so high and you're not getting the savings on the fuel either, it's a challenge.
Yeah, that is a challenge financially, but also practically for us at the AA, it's still a bit of a challenge. When you've got to have a vehicle that can tow 2 tons, that can have a 1 ton payload, that is an extra level of complexity, because very few EV vans can do that. Now that is changing, but it means for us as a company with our fleet, we have to pick and choose where we put the zero emission vehicles. So for our key assist, for our fuel assist, for our signs business, we have got quite a few electric vehicles. For others, we're introducing some hybrids. And then also we are using things like HVO in diesel vehicles, which again reduces CO2. So I think in this transition period, it won't all be electric. There will still be a mixture of fuels. And certainly at the AA in the last 12 months, we've quadrupled the number of low emission vehicles that we've got on our fleet, which we're very proud of, but there's still some way to go. And also the part that also interests me within the AA fleet is AA driving school and BSM, where again, we've introduced some electric vehicles there. And that's quite telling in a way, because they're very popular with the instructors and indeed the pupils. But there's still a bit of this backlash from some, because obviously all EVs are automatic. So it means that if you learn in a EV, you're learning in an automatic, and we still have a different driving test for automatics than for manual cars. And some of the old school purists look down on automatic drivers as not being so skilled. I think that's rubbish in this day and age, because ultimately we will all move to automatic vehicles. But there are issues there. Some of the leases for driving school cars are more expensive than for petrol cars, and therefore the rates that are charged by the instructors can be slightly higher. So again, still some way to go to get full integration of electric vehicles at the same cost of ICE vehicles across the board. I think we're getting there. I think we've made good progress, but there's still further to go.
A great summary, Edmund. Thank you very much for your insight and your up-to-the-date commentary on the latest budget, which is really appreciated. Plenty of food for thought from you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. A pleasure as always talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, thank you to the AA for joining GreenFleet Talks, and thank you for watching. Please tune into GF Television again soon.